morning students, welcome to Karthikeya IAS Academy. Let us move on to the today's session Hindu editorial analysis of July 2nd, 2021. And today's topic are relief and recompense. That is why we can see the vibrant judiciary in the pandemic, the wake of pandemic. Let us see the vocab of that editorial. Prodded. Prodded means poking, to point out, to stimulate. Close on the heels, to happen very soon. Going to be happen. Untenable, indefensible, not able to be defended. Adequacy, sufficient. Prioritize, treat as most important. Most important. Evade, to avoid. Impetus, give a push. Suo motu, acting without an appeal or request. Apathy, lack of interest. Lackadaisical, lacking enthusiasm or lethargic. Reap, to get as a return. Rejuvenation, restore. Assertion, declaration or a confident statement. Strong statement. Reticent, not to reveal, hidden. You can see on the top right corner, left corner. On the top left corner, you can see the article Relief and Recompense. The judiciary did well to assert the rights of pandemic hit workers and families. So judiciary is pointing out towards the rights of pandemic hit workers and their families. Before going into the article, let us see the background of the article. So we all know that judiciary is one of the organ of democracy. One of the organ of democracy. So what are the other two organs? What are the other two organs of democracy? What are the other two organs of democracy? Legislature and executive. In democracy, the importance of legislature is to make laws, is to enact laws. And executive will implement those laws. As we all know, the third organ of the democracy, judiciary, is the interpreter of constitution, will check whether the law is in the ambit of constitution or not. That means judiciary will oversee laws and decisions of the executive and legislature. Laws and decisions of executive and legislatures are overseen by judiciary. That's why this is also called as guardian of constitution. Guardian of constitution. If a law is not under the ambit of constitution, if it is not under the ambit of constitution, then it will recognize that particular law or declare that law as null and void. ఏం చేస్తుందండి జుడిషియరీ? ఎగ్జిక్యూటివ్ లెజిస్లేటివ్ చేసిన లాస్ని చెక్ చేస్తుంది. ఏ విధంగా చెక్ చేస్తుంది? అది కాన్స్టిట్యూషన్ యొక్క అంబిట్లో ఉందా లేదా అని చెక్ చేస్తుంది. అది లేకపోతే దాన్ని నల్ అండ్ వాయిడ్, డిక్లేర్ ఇట్ యాజ్ నల్ అండ్ వాయిడ్, అంటే అవుట్ సైడ్ ద అంబిట్ ఆఫ్ కాన్స్టిట్యూషన్ విచ్ కెనాట్ బి యాక్సెప్టెడ్ అని జుడిషియరీ డిక్లేర్ చేయడం జరుగుతుంది. సో జుడిషియరీ ఈజ్ హ్యావింగ్ సచ్ ఎ మ్యాసివ్ రోల్, వెరీ ఇంపార్టెంట్ రోల్ in democracy. So because of this, when there is a lapse in the works of executive and judiciary, if executive and legislative fails to do its work, fails to implement or do it work, then that gap will be filled by the judiciary. That gap will be filled by the judiciary. So for what? For the welfare of people. What is the work of legislature and executive? To check the welfare of people. They should work for the welfare of people. If it is not done by those executive and legislature, then judiciary will come into the action, and it will play its role, and it will point out or check or remind executive and legislative to work for the welfare of people. This is nothing but of a judicial activism. So you can see judicial activism in different cases. The most famous case, Vishaka Guidelines. Vishaka Guidelines were given by the Supreme Court for the sexual harassment at workplace. So Vishaka Guidelines were given by Supreme Court in the sexual harassment at workplace. So this to support the common women or the women going for the work. So for the safety of the women. So this is what the judiciary activism. So judicial activism, sometimes in COVID-19, in the pandemic also, judiciary made some interventions. Judicial interventions in pandemic. Interventions such as, like, it asked government for the shortage of oxygen concentrators. It questioned government about the shortage of oxygen concentrators, and it also asked about the plan, to reveal the plan to combat COVID-19. To reveal the plan to combat COVID-19. How government is going to combat the COVID-19 in upcoming days. And coming another question, it also posed another question to reveal vaccination plan. In this pandemic, it also asked to create database. To create database for the migrant workers before July 31st. And it also asked to compensate the loss faced by the families hit by COVID-19. సో ఎక్కడెక్కడ జుడిషియరీ యాక్టివ్ అయ్యి పాండమిక్లో ఏ క్వశ్చన్స్ని పోస్ట్ చేసిందండి గవర్నమెంట్కి అగెనెస్ట్గా? గవర్నమెంట్కి ఏమైనా క్వశ్చన్ చేసింది? షార్టేజ్ ఆఫ్ ఆక్సిజన్ కాన్సన్ట్రేటర్స్. వై ఇన్ దిస్ పీక్ సీజన్ ఆఫ్ COVID-19 in the second wave, why government is unable to arrange oxygen concentrators? What is the reason behind it? It asked about it. అంటే దాని వెనకతల కారణాలు ఏంటి, ఎందుకు ఆక్సిజన్ కాన్సన్ట్రేటర్స్ తక్కువగా ఉన్నాయి అని అడగడం జరిగింది. ఇంకోటి ఏంటి, రాబోయే రోజుల్లో COVID-19 ఏ విధంగా గవర్నమెంట్ ఎదుర్కోబోతుంది ఇన్ డిఫరెంట్ సెక్టార్స్, అది కూడా అడిగింది. ఇట్ ఆల్సో ఆస్క్డ్ టు రివీల్ వ్యాక్సినేషన్ ప్లాన్. నెక్స్ట్ ఎంత వ్యాక్సినేషన్ చేయబోతున్నాము, ఎలా చేయబోతున్నాము, హౌ యూఆర్ గోయింగ్ టు ఇంప్లిమెంట్ యువర్ వ్యాక్సినేషన్ ప్లాన్ ఇన్ ద కంట్రీ అని కూడా క్వశ్చన్ చేయడం జరిగింది. అదే కాకుండా డేటాబేస్ని క్రియేట్ చేయమంది. ఎవరి కోసం? మైగ్రెంట్ లేబరర్స్ అండ్ అన్ఆర్గనైజ్డ్ లేబరర్స్ కోసం ఒక డేటాబేస్ని క్రియేట్ చేయమంది. అండ్ ఆల్సో ఇట్ ఆస్క్డ్ టు కంపన్సేట్ ద ఫ్యామిలీస్ హూ లాస్ట్ దేర్ కిన్ ఇన్ కోవిడ్-19కి వాళ్ళ క్లోజ్ రిలేటివ్స్ని ఏ ఫ్యామిలీస్లో అయితే చనిపోయారో వాళ్ళని కంపన్సేట్ చేయమని చెప్పి, వాళ్ళ కంపన్సేషన్ అమౌంట్ ఇమ్మని చెప్పి జుడిషియరీ గవర్నమెంట్ని అడగడం జరిగింది. దిస్ ఈజ్ వాట్ ద జుడిషియల్ యాక్టివిజం. జుడిషియరీ హ్యాస్ పార్టిసిపేటెడ్ ఆర్ ఆస్క్డ్ ద గవర్నమెంట్ to about the concerns of the common people in this pandemic. This is what the background of this particular article. So let us move on to the article. In that particular article, it is also mentioned that NDMA is authorized to fix the compensation to the affected families. to affected families. So, Judiciary, Supreme Court pointed out to compensate the affected families, but it didn't intervene into the fixing of compensation. Why? Because that is mostly a policy decision which should be taken by NDMA. Let us see the NDMA body. You can see on the slide that National Disaster Management Authority is the statutory body. Statutory body means it was constituted based on NDMA Act 2005. Statutory body for disaster management in India. So the NDMA was formally constituted on 27 September 2006 in accordance with the Disaster Management Act 2005 with the Prime Minister as its chairperson. Who is the chairperson of the NDMA? Prime Minister is the chairman of NDMA, National Disaster Management Authority, and 9 other members. In this 9 other members, one can be designated as vice chairman. Coming to the mandate, why they constituted this National Disaster Management Authority. Its prime purpose is to manage, is to coordinate response to natural or man-made disasters. So it has to coordinate the response to natural or man-made disasters and for capacity building in disaster resilience and crisis response. When disaster will happen, when crisis occurs, it has to develop, before that it has to develop the capacity, either it is the human or infrastructural capacity to face that particular disaster. And also disaster resilience. Capacity building also has to be done in order to face the disaster, so that resilient infrastructures are to be constructed. Resilient infrastructures ni construct cheyadam, mundugane disaster raakamunde aa crisis yokka response, aa crisis ఎంత ఉంటుందో అంచనా వేయడం, దాన్ని బట్టి మెజర్స్ తీసుకోవడం, ఇదంతా the prime purpose of, is the main important purpose of NDMA. NDMA ఇవన్నీ చేస్తుందండి. It is also the apex body to lay down policies, plans and guidelines for disaster management to ensure timely and effective response to disasters. Disasters రాకముందే చూస్తున్నాం కదా, ఫ్లడ్స్ కానీ సైక్లోన్స్ కానీ వచ్చే ముందు హెచ్చరికలు జారీ చేస్తున్నారు. దట్ ఈస్ డ్యూ టు ద ఆ హెచ్చరికలు కానీ గైడ్లైన్స్ టు evacuate, evacuation ఇవన్నీ జరిగేది through the guidelines of disaster management. Coming to the vision of the disaster management, it has to develop holistic, proactive, technology driven and sustainable development strategy. Holistic ante completely in all perspectives. Proactive, beforely estimating the డిజాస్టర్ని ముందుగానే అంచనా వేసి ప్రోయాక్టివ్గా మెజర్స్ తీసుకోవడం. దట్టు ఎలా ఉండాలి? టెక్నాలజీ డ్రివెన్ అండ్ సస్టైనబుల్ డెవలప్మెంట్ స్ట్రాటజీ అయి ఉండాలి. దిస్ ఈజ్ వాట్ ద ఎన్డిఎంఏని మనం ఈ పాండమిక్లో ఎందుకు డిస్కస్ చేస్తున్నాం అంటే, అకార్డింగ్ టు ద నేషనల్ డిజాస్టర్ మేనేజ్మెంట్ యాక్ట్, COVID-19 is declared as a disaster. COVID-19 పాండమిక్ని డిజాస్టర్గా డిక్లేర్ చేయడం జరిగింది. సో డిజాస్టర్గా COVID-19 డిక్లేర్ చేసేటప్పుడు అకార్డింగ్ టు ద గైడ్లైన్స్ ఆఫ్ ద డిజాస్టర్ మేనేజ్మెంట్ యాక్ట్, వీ షుడ్ కంపన్సేట్ ద families who are been hit by the COVID-19. అంటే డిజాస్టర్ మేనేజ్మెంట్ యాక్ట్ ఎప్పుడైతే COVID-19 డిజాస్టర్గా డిక్లేర్ చేయడం జరిగిందో, ఆ డిజాస్టర్ మేనేజ్మెంట్ యాక్ట్ ప్రకారంగానే వాళ్ళని మనం కంపన్సేట్ చేయాలి. ఎందుకంటే డిజాస్టర్ మేనేజ్మెంట్ యాక్ట్ గైడ్ లైన్స్ ఏంటంటే, ఇఫ్ ఎ రీజియన్ ఈజ్ హిట్ బై ద డిజాస్టర్, వీ షుడ్ ప్రొవైడ్ మినిమం బేసిక్ లెవెల్ కంపన్సేషన్. అంటే బేసిక్ లెవెల్లో మనం వాళ్ళకి కంపన్సేషన్ ప్రొవైడ్ చేయాలి. సో అటువంటి ఒక బేసిక్ లెవెల్ ఆఫ్ కంపన్సేషన్ని ప్రొవైడ్ చేయమని జుడిషియరీ ప్రొవోక్ చేసింది. ఓకే, లెట్ us go into the article. Relief and recompense. It is a matter of relief and satisfaction that the Supreme Court has prodded means reminded the Union government to perform its statutory duty, that is duty by law, of fixing a compensation for the families of those who lost their kin to the COVID-19 pandemic. So Supreme Court is pointing out, reminding Union government union government to perform its duty by law. What is its duty by law? By law, according which law? NDMA. According to that law, it has to give a minimum compensation. So the Supreme Court is reminding union government to perform its duty by law to fix the compensation to the families. Families ki compensation ఇవ్వమని చెప్పి యూనియన్ గవర్నమెంట్ ని సుప్రీం కోర్ట్ గుర్తు చేయడం జరిగింది. ఆ తర్వాత coming to the next line, next point, you can see here I marked the article with points. The order comes close on the heels. Close on the heels ante going to happen. Close on the heels of a slew of directions. Slew means many directions. On registering the country's vast unorganized workforce and its army of interstate laborers on a national database and ensure that none of them went hungry. So the basic need, the right to food. Here this is right to food. So Supreme Court want to remind government that the order has come very close and many directions have been given to the government that country's very vast unorganized workforce, very large workforce, and its interstate laborers has to be registered on the national database. Has to be registered on the national database so that they cannot escape from the benefits given by the government. Ante government iche benefits ni through this database మనం ఈజీగా వాళ్ళకి చేర్చగలుగుతాం. So on the issue of making an ex gratia payment of those affected by the pandemic, a notified disaster under the Disaster Management Act, the center initially took the untenable stand and it lacked the financial resources to compensate for every COVID-19 death. When Supreme Court reminded government about the compensation, so government has took very untenable stand. That is nothing but unattainable stand means a weak stand for its delay. What it said that because of lack of financial resources, it is unable to compensate every COVID-19 patient death. Every COVID-19 death. In this way, it took a weak stand. Later on, it admitted that it is not due to the adequacy of resources. It is not due to the lack of resources, but due to the priority of decision. It is not on the priority of decision of expenditure. వాళ్ళ expenditure list లో this COVID-19 compensation అన్నది ఫస్ట్ ప్రయారిటీ రోల్ లేకపోవడం వల్ల ఇట్ ఈస్ డిలేయింగ్ టు కంపన్సేట్ ద ఫ్యామిలీస్ అని గవర్నమెంట్ దానికి సమాధానం చెప్పడం జరిగింది. సో నెక్స్ట్, సో you can see in the fourth paragraph, in the fourth point, that the frequent disasters, generally the disasters recognized by the NDMA like cyclones, earthquakes, floods and the pandemic is a one-time calamity. Generally calamity which comes from the natural like floods, cyclones and earthquakes, these are all the one time going. So they'll come in a particular region and for one time. So you can compensate those people affected in that particular region. But pandemic is not like that. It is been spread throughout the prolonged period. It is spread for a prolonged period and over the whole country. Ante pandemic మొత్తం కంట్రీ అంతటి మీద ఉంది. దట్ టు చాలా ఎక్కువ పీరియడ్ వరకు ఎగ్జిస్ట్ అవుతుంది అని గవర్నమెంట్ ఎక్స్ప్లెనేషన్ ఇస్తుందండి. అలా ఎగ్జిస్ట్ అయ్యేటప్పుడు వీ కాంట్ డిసైడ్, వీ డోంట్ హ్యావ్ రిసోర్సెస్ టు కంపన్సేట్ ఈచ్ అండ్ ఎవ్రీ ఏరియా అండ్ ఫర్ దిస్ ప్రొలాంగ్డ్ పీరియడ్ వీ కెనాట్ కంపన్సేట్ ఈచ్ అండ్ ఎవ్రీ కోవిడ్ డెత్ అని గవర్నమెంట్ ఆన్సర్ చేసింది. సో here you can see in the fifth para, in the earlier order you can see here, but even though that decision, you can see here, even though the decision is correct, that prolonged, even though that calamity is a prolonged phenomena, but Supreme Court is asking for minimum standard of relief. It is asking for minimum standard of relief as it is recognized under NDMA Act. So as it is recognized under the NDMA, it should have a minimum standards of relief, means a minimum basic necessities like food, and for the stay, these all are food, home, and these all are the basic living standards required by the common man which we have to provide అని చెప్పి సుప్రీం కోర్ట్ pointed out చేయడం జరిగింది. So the court correctly did not fix a compensation amount. It didn't fix any amount. I already mentioned that it didn't fix any amount. It didn't take any decision on the fixing of compensation amount. It was left over to the NDMA as it is the policy decision making body in disasters. So coming to the next point, you can see here the fifth point. In the earlier order, the court dealt with the need for comprehensive registration of all interstate and unorganized workers in the country. So recently, Supreme Court ordered for the registration of unorganized workers and the migrant workers in the country. So it asked to create a database and register all of them in that database. But it is unfortunate that it needed a pandemic. It already reminded once to the government to create a database, but it is very reluctant that it needed a pandemic. Pandemic vaste gaani government didn't respond to create a database. This is very bad and చెప్పడం జరిగింది. See here in this line you can see that it is unfortunate that it needed a pandemic and the resulting humanitarian, economic and social crisis for millions of workers to give an impetus. Impetus means give a force to the process. So now we are forcing to complete that process, that database process, so that they are not lack of minimum standards of relief. So coming to the next line, see, the Supreme Court, while disposing of suo motu proceedings on the miseries of migrant laborers, has now fixed a deadline of December 31st this year for all the states and duties. So now Supreme Court has ordered for the deadline. It gave a deadline to the central government that every state and central government has to register the migrant laborers and the unorganized laborers in this national database by December 31st. And the creation of database must be completed. Creation of that portal should be completed by July 31st. So by July 31st, from July 31st onwards, registration of laborers will be started. See, the center has been given a deadline of July 31st to make available a portal for its national database for unorganized workers project, so that it may be used for registering unorganized workers across the country. So in this point you can see that Supreme Court is asking to complete the creation of database portal by July 31st and to complete the registration of the migrant laborers and unorganized laborers by December 31st of this year. So see, next line, the union government, which was directed to make such a common module available to the states as far as back as in August 2018, it already said in 2018 to create such a portal to face the menace of migrant laborers, to address the problems, concerns faced by the migrant laborers. Coming to the last point, you can see here, the court has pulled up the Union Labour Ministry for its apathy and lackadaisical attitude and directed that the process of registration should begin by July 31st. So it also pulled Union Labour Ministry for its apathy. Apathy means lazy. Lackadaisical means lethargic. So Union Labour Ministry is very పట్టించుకోకపోవడం. Apathy and lackadaisical means పట్టించుకోకపోవడం. Union Labour Ministry's attitude and directed that the process of registration should begin by July 31st. It gave July 31st as a deadline for the creation of portal to register the migrant laborers. So this article has come up in the wake of COVID-19 to address the concerns faced by the migrant laborers and the unorganized laborers. This is the part how this itself says how judiciary is active. And here the heading of the article, you can see here, judiciary did well to assert the rights of pandemic hit workers and families. Now let us see the question. And the question can be posed from that particular article in the mains exam. That article is mainly related to the GS2 judicial activism, paper 2, GS paper 2 judicial activism. Here you can see the question, examine the role of judiciary in preserving the rights of common masses in the times of pandemic. I already mentioned so many judicial activism questions asked by the judiciary to the executive and legislative. So you can write all those and examine the role of judiciary. You have to detailedly describe the judicial activism in different cases, how it is preserving the rights of the common masses. Here the right preserved is right to life, that is right to food, right to have profession, right to have food, right to have profession, and right to live. So that's it. You can examine and write an answer.